Good afternoon, everybody. I think we'll go ahead and get this session started. I'm Brian Waddingham, Executive Director of the Coalition to Support Iowa's Farmers. And I guess a little bit about the coalition. We are funded by Iowa's commodity groups, the cattlemen being one of those, corn growers, Farm Bureau, Soybean Association, the Pork Producers, Turkey Federation, and Midwest Dairy. And it's those groups as well as some other allied industry partners that make our work all possible at no charge to Iowa's livestock farmers. We go out, sit at the kitchen table, stand in the middle of the feedlot, or sit down in the machine shed and just have a conversation with them about where they're at today, where they want to get to, what resources they have available, and then figure out the best way for them to meet those goals. The coalition, we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary in May, and to date have helped just under 2,900 livestock farmers with questions pertaining to rules and regulations, siting new livestock barns and feedlots, enhancing neighbor relations, as well as planting trees and shrubs around livestock farms. So a little bit of background on me, and now I want to talk a little bit about the panelists that we have today. First up is Peter Westra. Peter grew up on a swine and poultry farm near Hull and graduated from Dordt College with a BS in plant science. He now works as a certified crop advisor at the Hull Co-op Association. He works extensively with local beef, swine, and poultry producers, helping them market manure, along with assisting customers with manure management plans and other agronomic needs. Also, we have Jim Knuth. Jim is the Senior Vice President with Farm Credit Services of America. He has 30 years of commercial and agricultural lending experience and now leads Farm Credit Services of America's Iowa retail lending operations. The retail lending operations serve the needs of over 23,500 Iowa producers and include $7.3 billion in loan assets and the largest crop insurance agency in the state of Iowa. Jim grew up in Iowa on a beef cattle farm, is an Iowa State University graduate, married, and the father of 4 children. And finally, we have Alan Fredriksen. Alan and his family put up a couple monoslope buildings on their Ida County farm 2 to 3 years ago that are all deep-bedded barns. And I think the way we'll work this today, I'll have each of the panelists talk just a little bit, bring out a few key points that they have, and then go ahead and open it up for any questions that anybody from the audience may have. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Peter to start.
Good afternoon. Oh, this mic does work. Good. So I'm an agronomist. I'm not a cattle producer. I'm not someone that's worked in the cattle industry extensively as far as raising cattle. But what I have done since 2007 is market manure in the Sioux County area. If you guys are familiar with Sioux County, and I'm just giving you a little background so you understand where I'm coming from with some of my answers, is there's a lot of manure. We have the most amount of cattle, swine, dairy in the state for a county, and it's all concentrated in Sioux County. And where I've done a lot of my work is marketing poultry manure, but we've also marketed beef feedlot manure here in the last 4 years. We have a composting project where we work with a couple feedlots where we basically take their manure and change the composition so it's more transportable, that we can sell it to other farmers in the area. And then I've also worked with swine producers and other producers that have liquid facilities for cattle and how to use that manure on their farm. So that's my experience range, and basically any questions you might have as far as utilizing manure in your new potential feedlot or cattle feeding system, I might be able to help you answer.
My name is Jim Knuth again, and with Farm Credit Services of America, I have the privilege of leading our Iowa operations. I did grow up on a cattle ranch. I know how to dig a post hole, so that's my qualifications. But really want to bring a lender's or a financial view in terms of making a cattle barn. Can you hear me in the back of the room there? Is that better? Okay, thank you. Bring a lender's view in terms of finance, decision making, and really understanding the differences that we have a lot of livestock facilities here in the state of Iowa. A cattle barn is different than other livestock facilities. A cattle barn is typically an independent ownership model. It's not part of an integrated protein system like you'll see in a swine, turkey, egg. And that's a real key difference because you're not going to get an 8 or 10 or a 12-year contract that assures cash flow and repayment. A cattle barn means that you likely have inventory ownership control, and it comes with risk and rewards of that. A cattle barn, because it's independently owned, you're kind of all in. It's not like an open feedlot model where you may have paid for some of that infrastructure years ago. When you put up a cattle barn, you're really making a pretty conscious decision that we are going to be in the cattle industry. We're going to have to keep that barn full, over the next 5 and 10, 15 years. It's part of our farming operation. It's part of our diversity plan. And then I think a lot of it has to do with some of the decisions that you have to make too. When we have clients come in and talk to us a little bit about putting up a cattle barn, the first thing that we try to advise them is that this is not a save your farm or bet your farm kind of proposition. That this really should be part of a planned expansion, a planned conversion from open to covered feeding, or planned diversity. That with a cattle barn comes other capital requirements in terms of owning the inventory, the feed, the risk management and margining your hedge account, et cetera. So the cattle barn is your first equity investment, and there's other investments that need to come with it. We really advise clients to make sure that they're reasonably conservative as they're looking at putting up a cattle barn, and the amount of equity and capital that they're putting toward that, and then it has to be fit within the overall scope and financial ability of their operation. So, again, as we talk about cattle barns, there's a lot of differences to understand. First off, in terms of all livestock facilities are not created equal. And then there's a number of very specific decisions that you need to consider and make as you plan a cattle barn and an expansion of your livestock facility.
Again, my name's Alan Fredriksen from Holstein. We actually built our first building ourselves. We completed it in January of 2006. It took about a year and a half to build, just took a while to build. We pieced it together out of used iron out of Minnesota. We made a couple trips up to the Kesslut Brothers farm up in Marshall. Is kind of where some people argue, but that's kind of one of the first places these monoslopes, I guess, got their start. We put up our second one 3 years later. We started out thinking each building would hold 480, 500 head. Didn't take that long to figure out that was crowding them maybe a little too much. Dropped down to 240, 235. That's still plenty. Right now we're about 220 in a pen. We figure about 40 square feet an animal. Other people are going, there's quite a few of these around. They're going to 40 to 45 square feet in the building. Had a guy explain, well, there's two different types of these monoslope, the deep bedded packs. One's a wet building and one's a dry building. We probably, ours stays plenty wet. We haul around the outside of the pack, typically every 5 days. And then we leave the pack alone except this time of year, try to get it out before we get too much snow cover. And then again in the spring before we get done planting our soybeans. Right away I guess the one building was a new location. The other building we tore out an existing dirt yard. There wasn't a lot of available dirt space for the cattle and turned into your typical mud hole in the spring. We've seen an 8 to 11% better feed efficiency in the buildings. That's kind of a number a lot of people are using. You hear some are better. We took those numbers within a couple years after we built them, and I don't have anything to compare them to here in the last few years, just because the feeding programs have changed just enough that I'm not sure if the numbers would be relevant comparing them back 6-7 years ago. Both of our buildings are 100 by 200 feet. They 200 foot long. 100-foot wide. They're 85 feet of pen space. We do have an alley on the north side, and then we've got a bunk on the north and the south side. On each building on the east pen, we added another bunk on the east side just to give the cattle a little more bunk space. That's kind of where we put the newer ones. I tried to start them outside and then run them get them in the buildings within 2-3 weeks or whatever works. Most of those, the two smaller pens are about, I think, 9 inches of bunk space per head. I think that's all I really had.
Okay. Great. Does anybody in the crowd have any questions to get started? And if you do, raise your hand and ask it, and I'll repeat the question because I know this is being videotaped, but that way we can get it on film and let these guys answer it. Maybe while you guys are thinking, one question I get a lot, or we get a lot at the coalition, is manure value. And I think probably everybody can talk about that a little bit. But what manure value coming out of these buildings? Is there any numbers assigned to that, or do we have a ballpark on what that could be?
Well, I think it can vary drastically. If there's one thing that can vary in a farming operation, it's manure value, beyond crop yields and things like that. But one thing you need to consider, especially when you're looking at a new facility, is if you're going to go a liquid pit system or a open lots or even a bed pack system, you got to look at your land available to get that manure to, because a big component of that value back to you is going to be the cost of hauling and applying. You can have basically a liquid system where you have, say, perhaps 50 pounds of nitrogen, 25 to 30 pounds of phosphorus, and 45 pounds of potassium per 1,000 gallons. And you say you apply that on at 3,000 gallons an acre, which would be a pretty typical rate for maybe a corn-on-corn rotation. You can easily have about $200 an acre worth of value there to apply. That's a lot of value. And that can bring down your cost of production and your grain facility dramatically. And you can do the same things with the solid waste systems too. But in a liquid system, 3,000 gallons is 12.8 ton an acre. You can haul that close by the facility, but you cannot haul that very far. You get to 5 miles away, and that's very cost prohibitive, time prohibitive. So in that type of system, you can capture probably the most amount of manure value, but you have to be able to get it out to the field, and those fields need to be fairly close. If you have a dry lot system or a bed pack, you can do some things to that manure, compost it otherwise, get it dried down. You can probably haul it closer to 20 miles and still be economical. So when you're looking at a system that you want to use, I think you got to look at, do I have the land for this manure? Where is it located? And if I don't have the land for this manure, my neighbors do, and where are their fields located? And what kind of value am I going to get out of it that way? So there's a lot of different ways to look at that question.
Alan, you have any comments on manure value or what you're seeing out of a deep bedded barn?
Not so much the value. With the two buildings, we generally cover, and it'll vary year to year, but it's about 400 acres. And I think at that 400 acres, we are mining the phosphorus just a little bit. Our tests are starting to actually come down, so we've had to apply commercially in the fall.
Jim, any comments on manure value? When someone comes in for a loan, you probably can't take a look at what the proposed manure value is coming out of an open feedlot or a hog barn on that at all, can you?
Not on a cattle facility yet, really. I think we have a lot better handle on manure value coming out of hog facilities, but the cattle facilities, whether it's deep bed or pit, I think that's still we know there's value. It's like what was mentioned. How do you extract that value, where the land is, et cetera?
Anybody get any questions in the audience yet? Keep thinking. Okay. Also, then maybe talk a little bit I guess this was maybe a question more I had for Mike Sexton, but maybe something that could be addressed if anybody's got some ideas. Something else that we run into a lot is with the recent DNR Region 7 EPA work plan agreement, where they're taking more of a look at some of these open feedlots that could have some potential environmental issues. Is there any advice if I'm in a position where I can't decide if I should close down an open lot or put some controls in place versus put up a building? Alan, you maybe alluded to it a little bit, that you had some issues with an open lot, and that's maybe what prompted you to think about the building. But anybody want to weigh in on that or things you've heard?
We've also done a couple spent some money on some open yard runoff control systems. The one place we did, it didn't cost us a terrible, there's no lagoon involved or anything like that. More of just a settling basin, then release the water out after the crop ground dries out. It's fairly easy, but it's not perfect either. These buildings, if you can get away from that, the runoff like that, it makes life a little easier, I guess, because you're always fighting the water. No matter how good of a control system you have designed, there's always water to haul, it seems like.
I guess as remarks to what Alan said, water is the enemy in all these facilities, even the liquid facility. The less water you can have. Obviously, you need something that's pumpable, but the less water you can have, the more nutrient content you have per 1,000 gallons. Or the less water you have per ton, the more nutrient content you have per ton, so your hauling and application costs are less. And in an open lot, of course, then you have the extra risk of water taking manure away from the site, so you can't extract the value out of that yourself on your farm field, or also you have an environmental risk to consider. So, there's lots of different ways around that problem, but I certainly think these buildings and facilities where we are diverting water away from them or just basically not capturing that water is going to be good for everything, environmentally and for your crop operation or your livestock operation.
Okay, and maybe another kind of a follow-up question on that, Peter. You talked earlier a little bit. I know you sell some manure up there and work extensively with getting the manure onto crop ground that needs it. Is that kind of the wave of the future, you think? We get that question a lot. We're going to put up another building. We want to capture that manure value, but boy, our acres are about stretched. We want to sell some to our neighbors. They want to buy it. But is that still feasible, or are we looking more at going the route of using a manure broker?
I think, it all depends on what your personal situation is. So I am a manure broker. That's basically one of my calling cards. I'm also an agronomist. I work with, 2 feedlots as far as they have more manure than they can use at their facility, and they wanted some help to find homes for that manure. So that's one of the ways we get involved. And I do that in the middle of manure country. So I've always wondered how easy would that be if I moved to central Iowa where we don't have as much manure. I would think it would be easier. There's not as much competition from a swine facility or another facility. So it certainly can be done as a way to be able to expand the operation without the land base. Remember, of course, that you can capture probably more value if you apply it on your farm. That's always going to be true. But land is hard to come by in any part of the state. And for someone getting into the business, a livestock facility can be a great way to get a start. And that is one way to do that, is to use an agronomist like myself that's interested in something like that. And basically what we do is we figure out what the producer's manure is worth and figure out what an acceptable market price would be to someone down the road that might need that manure. And the other thing we also bring into the equation is we're able to variable rate that with the equipment that we have, much like one would variable rate commercial fertilizer. And that can bring up some of the value proposition to the crop farmer down the road. So yeah, I think it's a viable alternative, but that being said, it's always, if you can use it yourself, you're always going to take the most advantage out of it. There's no doubt about that. So.
Yeah, Brad.
When you're figuring that value on that manure, how many different variables are you considering? Just NP and K, or P, or sulfur, or what other, how many different things do you consider when you're establishing that value?
So we usually consider multiple things. One, there's nitrogen. Now, not all nitrogen's made the same. You've got organic nitrogen and ammonia nitrogen available in that manure. So ammonia nitrogen is typically counted at 100% or 90%. The organic portion I typically credit at about 30%. We use the total P value typically because even though it might not all be available the first year, the following crop can use it and the soil can basically hold it. The same thing would be true with potassium. Also, you typically take some value for the sulfur. You can also potentially take a value for application that a person might normally incur with commercial fertilizer. But those would be the main things that I value. Typically, farmers are going to want a discount from the total commercial value, obviously, because they know you have something that you need to get rid of. But yet, they also see the value in it and don't, see that they can offset some of their commercial fertilizer costs, maybe a little bit lower price point. So I think there definitely is a middle road there. And of course, you got to pay for hauling and application costs to the field too. But there can be some cash flow that's brought out through the manure that way.
Yeah, Tom.
And typically, on them, are they getting much more money than what the application costs in their value?
So the one producer I'm working with is a deep bedded barn. We composted his manure this year. Basically, we went from a 15-15-15 analysis, composted it up to a 15-25-35, and we were selling it to the farmer at a hauled and applied price at about $20 to $25 a ton. So, hauling and application are not that much. So, obviously, we were getting some costs back to.
Even like in your hog field.
Yes.
I mean, is it much more than I buy manure too?
In the Hull area, the typical price of hog manure, if someone asks me, is I say buy it for 60% of the cost of the commercial value.
Right.
Which
And what's their application cost?
typically you're going to talk about $0.015 per gallon to 2 cents, which means your typical value of the hog manure, 3,000 gallons at maybe $50 per thousand, that's $150 an acre. And so you're talking at maybe $60 application costs, and you have maybe $120 worth of value. So your cost back to the hog site was maybe $15 to $20 a thousand.
I guess it's sow manure.
Sow manure is a lot less valuable.
Yeah. So they're not making nothing on it.
Correct.
All they're doing is getting rid of it.
That's probably right.
Any other questions from the audience? Yeah.
What's your compost system like?
So, yeah, there's lots of different ways to compost. Our composting system basically consists of getting some fresh manure out of the pens, out of the lot, putting it into a long windrow, and then introducing a rake on a payloader every other day so that we get some air and get that pile started. Then typically we add probably 6 to 8 inches of manure to that front teach face and slowly build it up until the point where it's as tall as our payloader can work it. And then we slowly build out so that we have typically, a 7 to 10,000 ton pile at the end of the year. There are lots of people that do use turners, do smaller piles. The reason I haven't been using that is because basically you got to move that pile all the time and it takes a lot of land base. And so then there's a lot of added cost and handling and so forth. But there are a lot of different ways of doing that, and I don't think we've perfected it by any means. So.
Are you getting the nitrogen stabilized enough so it's not an issue on the bedded barn?
So in a composting situation, I would say we're losing nitrogen, and I don't know how we could capture more necessarily. The way you would capture more, in my understanding, is by introducing more carbon sources, that you would hopefully capture some of that. But as we're losing moisture, which is what we're primarily doing, we're going from, say, 60% moisture down to 15% and concentrating, we're losing some ammonia. I mean, it's going up with the water vapor. So that's typically, that's one of the things you're not going to get if you're composting. You're going to lose some nitrogen, in my mind. I think there are, that's one of the things I think we could maybe do to improve, is try to capture more.
Yeah, Ben.
On the customers that are buying the liquid hog manure, cow manure, stabilizing nitrogen, or using additives, if so, what are they using?
Yeah, I'll try. The question is for the guys that are, buying manure and then applying manure, are they using any sort of stabilizer in the manure? And if so, what is that stabilizer for nitrogen?
So I've had experience with all the above there. I would put it this way. In solid manure, we're typically not using anything. It's mostly organic nitrogen. It's stabilized anyway, what's left. I mean, there's some ammonia, but when you're talking hog manure, typically guys are not using a stabilizer. Should they be? That's a fair question. I think it probably depends on when they're applying it and how they're applying it. Typically if later you apply it, of course the soils are cooler, therefore you don't need it as much. The cost of a stabilizer is fairly steep. So I have never been one to really promote it. Mostly if you can manage your manure so you get it applied at the right time, that's probably the best situation for everyone. If you can't, you have to haul it earlier. A stabilizer would be wise. As far as pit additives go, I've seen some pit additives. They're all over the board as far as what they claim and what they think they can do. And the best I've seen from a pit additive as far as performance is they get the solids more dissolved. And that can be a big thing for a farmer. But I can't say I've ever seen any nutrient be increased by the pit additive, or at least that I could for sure attribute to that. But as far as getting solids in a pit, a liquid cattle pit to distribute well, they can certainly help that, and that can be a big problem for producers. So for that reason, I could see using one.
Yeah, Russ.
Question for Jim about financing terms on buildings,
Question, I just repeat it real quick. The question was just about financing terms on cattle buildings, terms. Jim will explain those.
Sure. Well, the first thing you probably need to understand is a lot of cattle barns are not cited individually as standalone saleable assets like you see in hog barns or turkey barns. And that's not everyone, but typically they're integrated more into some existing building sites, infrastructure, et cetera. So, again, from a lender's perspective, you don't typically have just a standalone saleable asset there. So the most common thing that we've done, and we've financed cattle barns over Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, is use what I would call traditional collateral. A lot of it's been dirt. And so then they are able to amortize that building over a 15, 20-year period where the cash flow really works. And when we have cattle up cycles, can they prepay and pay down and pay it off? Absolutely. But it gives them the flexibility, and especially where you don't have a standalone, really saleable collateral there. If you want to finance a standalone building, just building only, usually we'll loan up to about 60%. It's not as high as a hog barn or other things because there is no contract. We don't have a long market or history of cattle barn sales. So from a true appraisal standpoint, they're hard to value. We have a 20-year history on hog barns. We don't really have that on cattle barns. And then typically when you have a standalone, you're talking a term of 10 to 15 years, something like that. It's all about making the cash flow work and then understanding, how it fits in with the rest of your operation. Does that help? Okay.
Okay, maybe a question. I'll go back to Alan. Talk a little bit about the learning curve you had going from an open feedlot to a deep bedded barn. What were maybe some of the challenges that you didn't expect, but what were also some of the opportunities or the benefits that also were a surprise to you?
I would say two of the benefits that really stand out, there's no snow to push. Big deal. There's no mud. Big deal. It surprised me how often we had to scrape the pens and haul them out. That's one thing we keep fairly busy at. Anybody with those buildings, they kind of know what I mean. It's constant. If it needs it, it needs to be done. It is surprising in the couple different times of the year how the buildings will air themselves out. And I had it explained to me one time, and it's true. Soybean planting time and then soybean combining time. You can get by a week, sometimes 2 weeks without doing anything. And it really varies on the amount of cattle you have in there and the size. You can easily go 2 weeks with a 700-pounder in there. If you've got 1,400 pounders and it's been humid for a week, 10 days, then you're every other day, maybe every 3 to 4 days. It really varies a lot that way. One of the big things you don't hear a lot about, I don't think, and I think it's the biggest benefit to the building. The winter time's a big plus. You keep them warm. But the shade in the summer is tremendous. Don't discount that. It's just amazing how much cooler that building will be in the heat of the day than standing outside. And it doesn't take much of a breeze, and you can feel the air flowing from the south through the north. And it's not a lot. If it's a real calm day, it's enough that it just keeps the air moving just enough that it doesn't get stale. Typically, the cattle won't back off feed if you get 3-4 days of hot, humid. As long as there's a little breeze, they won't back off feed. If it stretches into 5 or 6 days and you lose your wind, then you'll start fighting that too, 4 or 5 days down the road.
Any questions? Yeah, Tom.
Do you have any kind of figured up any way of what your manure handling cost is, whether it's per head per year? The session before, they called deep bedded buildings, the cost was about 30 cents a head a day.
Yeah, I heard that too. And if you're charging 30 cents at a custom rate, you don't get very far, do you?
Trying to figure the bedding and the equipment.
Yeah. And I'd say we're at that point where the two buildings really didn't cost us as far as equipment per se.
You have to replace it sometime.
Correct. You will use it more. The bedding, I guess that was a question where I wanted to emphasize a little bit. I figure about 3/4 of a bale, cornstalk bale per head. But in Holstein, kind of unique in that situation, there's a countertop manufacturing facility in town, and I get quite a bit of their dust. And it is sawdust. You get it on the wrong day. If we don't have it protected, it'll blow away. I use that from the spring through the fall. And I've noticed the corn stalks, the bedding packs seem to generate more heat in the summer. You use the sawdust in the summer, the pack itself isn't generating that heat like the corn stalks will. And then you can tell the reverse in the wintertime. If you get a couple loads of dust and you want to use that in the wintertime, it'll start freezing up quicker than the pens maybe you bedded with the corn stalks. So that's where my 3/4 bale per head is low if you're just using corn stalks.
Okay, maybe a question, kind of circle back around to Jim, what we talked about at the beginning. If a farmer's out there and he's not sure, he maybe has to implement some environmental controls. He's kind of concerned with some runoff issues. Also not sure, though, about the building. I know Farm Credit Services of America does loan money for projects to improve environmental compliance. Is there a general rule of thumb? I mean, if they come in and tell you their situation about what they have for open lots versus what they want to do on a confinement. You want to talk a little bit about that process, how you work them through all that to figure out what the best route is to go?
Yeah, the first thing you ask for is there a rule of thumb? And, the answer is really no, there's not. It's a case-by-case basis. But the issue that you've talked about is what kind of upgrades am I going to need to do on my open lots? A lot of times that's a trigger. I mean, it's really a trigger for a decision about, do I invest that money or do I go forward and think about building a barn? Because that's what we really see. That, again, I can't give you a rule of thumb. It's a case-by-case based on your existing open lot facilities, but it's a trigger for them to start considering, do I put that money in that open lot existing infrastructure, or should I put some money into a cattle barn? And then they work through their own equity position, their cash flow. How can we finance that? Are they going to have a standalone? Are they going to use some dirt? Do they want to finance it over 10 years? That's an aggressive repayment. Can they finance it over 15 or 20 years using some traditional collateral? Brian, some of it's luck and timing. And I don't know how to address that, but when you put your cattle facility, I see somebody smiling already here. When you put your cattle facility up and your first few years you hit a good, solid upcycle in the cattle market, that helps. And when you put your cattle facility up, and because, we believe there's three certain things in life: death, taxes, and cycles. And, part of it is when you put your building up, if you do hit some down cycles and some tough times, that's why we tell you that make sure you're not betting the farm or trying to save the farm with a cattle barn, that this should be part of a long-term business plan. And you may hit it great, you may hit it not as great, but in the long run, hopefully it'll pay off in the same manner. But those are all trigger points as you're trying to make a decision about a cattle barn.
Any questions?
I have a question for Alan. Alan, if you could change something that you've done with your buildings, there's one thing you could change, what would it be?
We've got one building to fall underneath the 500 head confinement capacity. We did build, one of the building has, the roof does not extend over the feed bunk. It's set back about 10 feet. Therefore, it's considered an open lot. I'm not sure if that was worth that, because every 2 to 3, 4 inch rain, the pens fill up with water. You get 3 or 4 inches of water in the pen, and something needs to be done with that. So I'm not sure that was and we haven't did anything about it yet, but the day will come when we do. Just, it's one more thing to do after, when it rains, I guess. And I've just got a vac tank. You go in there and you suck the rainwater out and get rid of it. But that's probably number one.
Yeah.
Are you able to clean it with the cattle out of the pen, or do you leave them in the pen?
Since we've got the alleyway on the north side, and we've got gates on the ends of the building, and we also have a gate on the north side of the pen, I open that gate up and let them run up and down the alleyway. And then you can get to the back side of the pen much easier if you've got a full pen. And I think the exercise does them some good, too. We pretty much do that every time we scrape a pen, just let them out there and let them run, I guess.
Question is just the difference between a hoop and a monoslope. Did they do any considering before they built the monoslope, and then the cost differences?
I can honestly say, and I won't get myself in trouble with Brent Bryant, that I've never been in a hoop building. I've seen enough of them as hay sheds lose their cover. I'll leave it at that, but no, never considered it, I guess.
You know, again, it's just an individual producer decision. Obviously, one's a lot more expensive than the other, and sometimes you get what you pay for. But sometimes producers who are getting into it on a smaller scale, maybe bringing back a young son, you know, they want to take some of their equity and use it other places, or they don't want that kind of investment, and then they're drawn toward a hoop building. So again, there's not a rule of thumb. It's a case-by-case decision, and what kind of outcome do you want, you know, from that cattle building? So.
Any other questions?
Do you know of anybody that's using on-slope buildings for a cow-calf type of operation rather than as a feeding operation?
We have seen some calving buildings. You know, the advantage is there as we talk to those producers. Obviously, you can get the cows in, so you can monitor the calving situation a lot more. You're not calving in the mud and in the rain and some of that. But one of the biggest things they tell us is they tend to keep those cows in, you know, through April. Really let their pasture get established, and they really think there's some, you know, significant positives out of not calving in the mud. The issue, though, is utilization of that building. You know, you're not got cattle on feed 12 months a year. You know, it's only about a 2, 3, 4 month at most utilization of that building, and so, you know, that's the big issue about, can I afford a building that I'm only utilizing? We've seen a couple people feed some dairy heifers in the summer, and those, you know, again, trying to expand the utilization of what I would call calving under roof, but haven't seen a lot, but seen some. So.
We're just kind of diving into this a little bit, so I don't have much to say about it, but I think there's some real merit. Know a couple people that are going to a group calving deal, calving every 120 days, cycling the cows in and out of the building. Don't know enough about it, but I'm not so sure that's not going to be kind of the future on some guys' farms that are doing that. Can kind of utilize the buildings the whole year round, you know, space your calving out, have calves at different times to sell. I don't know enough about it, but in theory, I think it's a pretty good idea.
Other questions? Maybe I'll switch back a little bit to Peter. You know, we hear quite a bit. There's a lot of folks out there when they put up a new building, they want to stay under 500 animal units, so they don't have to have a manure management plan. Others want to stay under 1,000 head on open feedlots, so they don't need to have a nutrient management plan. And with you working extensively in those, you just want to talk to us a little bit about what those plans all entail and how they might be beneficial to farmers?
Yeah, I think most people look at them as a pretty big hoop to jump through at some point when they're looking at starting a facility or expanding a facility. And they certainly can be, but, you know, more often than not, if you take a look at your manure that you're producing and utilizing it, if you're utilizing it properly or to the point where you're not over-applying some fields, you're really not going to be doing a lot different under a manure management plan than just applying proper rates. So then the other things you got to look for and you got to jump through, or you just got to get agreements with people that aren't part of your farm as far as different fields, and you have to basically keep soil tests, and that can be a hoop to jump through, but most farmers today are doing soil testing pretty regularly on their farm, and I think it should be. And then also, you know, the agreements, you know, if you're going to be, a farmer's going to be utilizing manure on his farm, he really, you know, he probably wants to have an agreement in place with someone anyway. So it can be a sticking point and it can be a hoop to jump through, but if you're utilizing someone that has done those things before, I don't think is that big of a hoop. If you're working with, a local provider or someone like the coalition or something like that to get together the people you need to make that dream happen for you. So that's all I'd have to say about that, I guess.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Any more questions for the panelists? Do the panelists have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think Brian's been pretty modest today. If you are thinking about putting up a cattle barn, one of the first people you ought to call is the coalition, because they will help you with a number of aspects, from siting and expertise and manure management plans, not making that a big hurdle, et cetera. We've had the vast majority of our customers probably at one time or another have used the coalition, and it's there for producers. It's there for producers who are expanding or putting up a barn for the first time. So that's a great, if you're trying to figure out where's the first step, call the coalition.
Thanks, Jim. And we're actually in booth 55. Rita Cook is right there. Kent Mauer's in the back. So feel free to stop by and visit with any of us. But thanks, Jim. Yeah.
Do you have much health problems and safety problems with pretty stupid stuff and regular routine and let the cattle out?
What was that last part?
Do you let the cattle out of the pen on a routine basis and now?
Just when we clean the outside of the pens is when we let them out to get a little exercise and to run around. You can have feet problems. I thought we were getting by pretty good a couple years ago, and we started backing off our roughage, our fiber a little bit, try to get a little more corn in them, and that was a mistake. There was noticeably more feet problems in a couple of the pens. It's just all about keeping them on an even keel, feeding them. We do not do a CTC program, the once-a-month deal, and I'm starting to wonder maybe if we should. Otherwise, a little bit of the foot rot problem is really all we've run into so far.
Any other questions? All right, with that, let's give our panelists another big round of applause, please.